Somewhere at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean right now, there are nuclear weapons that no country has ever claimed. They've been sitting there for over 50 years, 3,000 meters down, in complete darkness. The Soviets lost them and decided it was better to pretend they never existed. But in 1974, the CIA had a different idea. They were going to steal them in broad daylight, right under the Soviet Navy's nose. And to pull it off, they hired the most eccentric billionaire in American history to build the most expensive lie ever constructed. This is the story of Project Azorian, the most audacious heist the Cold War ever produced, and almost no one knew it happened. March 1st, 1968, a Soviet submarine designated K-129 leaves its base on the Kamchatka Peninsula. 98 men on board, a routine patrol mission in the Pacific Ocean. 3 weeks later, silence. K-129 misses its scheduled radio check-in. Then another. The Soviet Navy launches one of the largest search operations in its history. Over 40 ships, dozens of aircraft. They search for weeks. Nothing. 98 men vanished. No distress signal. No wreckage, no explanation. The Soviet government did what Soviet governments do. They said nothing. Officially, K-129 never existed. The families of the crew were told even less. But 3,000 miles away, in a windowless room buried inside the Pentagon, American analysts were listening to something the Soviets didn't know anyone could hear. The United States Navy had a secret so classified that most of the people who worked around it didn't even know what it was for. Stretched across the floor of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of meters deep, was a network of underwater microphones, hundreds of them. Placed there over decades, connected by cables running to listening stations on shore. The military called it SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System. It was built for one purpose, to track Soviet submarines. And it worked. Silently, invisibly. The Soviets had no idea it existed. On the 11th of March, 1968, SOSUS picked up something unusual. A series of underwater acoustic signals originating from the North Pacific. The signature of a catastrophic implosion. Something enormous had just been destroyed at extreme depth. The analysts ran the numbers, cross-referenced the signals across multiple listening stations, triangulated the source. They had a location, precise to within a few miles. K-129 hadn't just disappeared, she had died. And the United States government knew exactly where she was buried. They said nothing. They filed the coordinates. And then someone, somewhere in the CIA, asked a question that would consume the next 6 years of American intelligence history. What if we could get her back? The question sounds simple. Get the submarine back. But the moment you look at the actual numbers, simple becomes impossible. K-129 was lying at a depth of approximately 16,500 feet. That is 3 miles straight down. At that depth, the water pressure is over 7,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a car into the size of a shoebox. No salvage operation in human history had ever been attempted anywhere close to that depth. The deepest successful recovery operation before this had reached maybe a few hundred feet. The technology to go deeper simply did not exist. And it wasn't just the depth. The submarine itself weighed approximately 1,750 tons. Nearly 2,000 tons of steel sitting on the floor of the Pacific Ocean, 3 miles down in international waters, with the Soviet Navy actively patrolling the region. The CIA brought in the best engineers in the country. They ran the numbers every way possible. Every conventional approach failed on paper before it even began. But there was one idea, unconventional, borderline insane. And the more the engineers looked at it, the more they thought it might actually work. You build a ship, not a normal ship, a ship unlike anything ever constructed. A ship with a giant mechanical claw built into its hull, capable of descending 3 miles to the ocean floor, grabbing the submarine and lifting the entire thing back to the surface. The estimated cost, $350 million in 1970 money. The CIA approved it anyway. There was just one problem. You can't hide a ship this size. The Hughes Glomar Explorer was 618 feet long. It had a derrick tower rising 200 feet above the deck. It had a crew of over 170 people, and it had a giant hole in the middle of its hull that no legitimate deep-sea mining vessel would ever need. If the CIA simply sailed the ship to the middle of the Pacific Ocean and started lowering equipment to the bottom, every intelligence agency in the world would ask the same question. What is that ship actually doing out there? They needed a cover story, and not just any cover story. They needed one so believable, so perfectly constructed, that the Soviet Union would look at this ship and see exactly what the CIA wanted them to see. They needed Howard Hughes. In 1970, Howard Hughes was the most famous recluse in America, a billionaire who had once been the most daring aviator, the most powerful Hollywood producer, the most ambitious engineer in the country. And then, somewhere along the way, he had vanished, locked himself inside a series of hotel penthouses, refused to see almost anyone, communicated through intermediaries. He was also, crucially, completely obsessed with the ocean floor. He had publicly and loudly declared his intention to mine manganese nodules from the deep seabed, rare minerals sitting on the ocean floor waiting to be harvested. Everyone knew Hughes was serious about this. He had the money, the engineers, and the documented obsession to back it up. So when Howard Hughes announced he was building a massive, custom ship specifically designed to extract minerals from the deep ocean floor, nobody questioned it. It was the perfect lie because it was exactly the kind of thing Howard Hughes would actually do. It took 4 years to build. 4 years of engineering problems nobody had ever solved before. 4 years of secrecy, compartmentalization, and controlled deception. In the summer of 1974, the Hughes Glomar Explorer left port and sailed to a precise set of coordinates in the North Pacific Ocean. Coordinates that only a handful of people on Earth knew the significance of. On board were 178 crew members. Most of them had no idea what they were actually there to do. They believed the cover story. As far as they knew, they were on a mining expedition. Below the ship, through the moon pool, the CIA began lowering a device they called Clementine, a giant steel claw the size of a house, hanging from a pipe string that would eventually stretch 3 miles down to the ocean floor. The operation was called Project Azorian, and for a few weeks in the summer of 1974, it was the most expensive, most secretive, and most audacious intelligence operation the United States had ever attempted. And then, on a quiet morning, the radar operator on board the Glomar Explorer picked up something on his screen. Soviet ships, multiple vessels, heading directly toward them. The Soviet Navy had noticed the Glomar Explorer, and they were coming to take a closer look. Below the surface, 3 miles down, Clementine's claw was already descending toward K-129. The Americans had perhaps days, maybe less, before the Soviets got close enough to realize what was actually happening. The most dangerous moment of the entire operation had just begun. The Soviet ships didn't leave. For days, they circled the Glomar Explorer, close enough to watch, close enough to photograph, close enough to make every CIA officer on board deeply uncomfortable. But not close enough to see what was happening 3 miles below. The crew of the Glomar Explorer did what they had been trained to do. They stayed in character. They ran their mining equipment on the surface. They acted like a commercial operation. They waved at the Soviet sailors. Below the surface, Clementine kept descending. It took 8 days for the claw to reach the bottom. 8 days of lowering pipe section by pipe section, 3 miles of steel tubing assembled in the dark, under the watchful eyes of the Soviet Navy above, while the CIA prayed nothing would break. And then Clementine touched the ocean floor, directly beside the wreck of K-129. What happened next had never been attempted in human history. The claw's arms slowly opened. Technicians on the surface guided it inch by inch using sonar feedback. The arms moved around the hull of the submarine. And then they closed. Clementine had the submarine in its grip. The order was given, begin the ascent. For 3 days, the pipe string pulled. 3 days of the most delicate, most dangerous lift in engineering history. The weight on the line was extraordinary. The stress on every weld, every coupling, every section of pipe was at the absolute limit of what the engineers had calculated. And it was working? Slowly, impossibly, K-129 was rising, 3 miles of ocean above her becoming 2 miles, then 1. The submarine that had lain undisturbed on the ocean floor for 6 years was moving. The CIA officers on board allowed themselves, for the first time, to believe it might actually work. And then they heard it. A sound that every engineer on board had feared since the day the project began. A deep, catastrophic crack. Then another. Then the unmistakable groan of steel failing under impossible load. Several of Clementine's gripping arms had fractured. The structural integrity of the capture vehicle was failing. What happened next took seconds. The broken sections of the claw released their grip, and approximately 2/3 of K-129. The middle and rear sections of the submarine, the parts containing the ballistic missile compartment, the primary intelligence target of the entire operation, broke away and fell. Back down to the ocean floor, 3 miles down, gone. The CIA watched on their instruments as the most valuable intelligence prize of the Cold War disappeared back into the darkness. What remained in Clementine's grip was the forward section of the submarine, roughly 38 feet of the bow, a fraction of what they had come for. They brought it up anyway. When the forward section of K-129 was finally brought into the dry shelter aboard the Glomar Explorer, the CIA got their first look at what 6 years on the ocean floor and 3 miles of water pressure had left behind. The section was badly deteriorated. Salt water and time had done their work, but it was intact enough to examine. Inside, they found 2 nuclear torpedoes, still armed, recovered from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean after 6 years, in conditions no weapon was ever designed to survive. They found cryptographic equipment, code machines, and communication devices that Soviet naval intelligence used to encrypt their most sensitive transmissions. Exactly the kind of material the NSA had been desperate to obtain for years. They found documents, operational manuals, technical specifications, navigational records, fragments of the intelligence picture the CIA had hoped to assemble. And they found the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors, men who had died when K-129 went down in March of 1968, who had lain on the ocean floor for 6 years, whose families had been told nothing. The CIA faced a decision that had nothing to do with intelligence gathering. What do you do with the remains of enemy sailors recovered from the bottom of the ocean during a secret operation you can never acknowledge? They gave them a burial at sea. A formal military ceremony conducted in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in complete secrecy. CIA officers in dress clothes standing at attention. The Soviet naval hymn played. The bodies of 6 Soviet sailors committed to the deep. The ceremony was filmed. Years later, after the operation became public, the United States gave a copy of that film to the Russian government to give to the families. It was, by any measure, an unexpected act of humanity in the middle of one of history's most cynical operations. The Hughes Glomar Explorer returned to port in September 1974. The CIA filed its reports, the recovered materials were analyzed, and Project Azorian was quietly buried inside the classified archives of American intelligence, where it was expected to stay forever. It lasted 8 months. In the early hours of June 5th, 1975, a team of burglars broke into the offices of the Summa Corporation in Los Angeles, Howard Hughes' company. They were looking for cash and valuables. What they found instead were documents, internal memos, references to a CIA operation, a ship, a submarine, the ocean floor. The burglars didn't know what they had, but they knew it was worth something. The documents made their way to a journalist, then to another. And then, in February of 1975, reporter Seymour Hersh published a story in the New York Times. The story didn't get everything right, but it got enough. The secret was out. The CIA did what intelligence agencies do when a secret escapes. They called every major news organization in the country and asked them not to publish. Most complied, for a while. And then Los Angeles Times ran the full story. And after that, there was no putting it back. When reporters called the CIA for comment, they received a response that has since become one of the most famous phrases in the history of government secrecy. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of this operation. The Glomar Response. Those 6 words have since been used by intelligence agencies, government departments, and corporations around the world, thousands of times, to avoid answering questions they do not wish to answer. Every time a government says it can neither confirm nor deny something, that language came from a ship in the Pacific Ocean in 1974, trying to steal a Soviet submarine. Project Azorian officially remains one of the most ambitious covert operations in CIA history. The agency considers it, despite the partial failure, a success. They recovered nuclear weapons. They recovered cryptographic material. They buried enemy sailors with dignity. And they kept the secret for 8 months, which, for an operation involving hundreds of people, a ship the size of a skyscraper, and the Soviet Navy watching from 50 yards away, is arguably pretty good. If you made it this far, you already know there are more stories like this one. Operations that never made the history books, Decisions made in the dark that changed everything. If that's the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. See you in the next one.